So on to turn number 12. 11 was just completed, and a few interesting developments here on turn number 11. So first things first, thank you guys for the comments on my last video as far as the Maritime Air Patrol and the convoy rating and all those rules. I just had a hard time seeming to grasp exactly what the rules were explaining when it comes to the Maritime Air Patrol and everything. So definitely appreciate the comments to help clarify that situation. So I think, hopefully, I finally have a good idea of what exactly the rules are saying. So because of the fact that I did it incorrectly last turn, I went ahead and corrected a couple of things. So if you remember over here in Sea Zone 23, I had brought a couple of British destroyers and put a fighter on combat air patrol, and then the fighter and the destroyer attacked one of the subs, and the British didn't get any hits, and the German sub took out a destroyer. So I went ahead and gave the destroyer back to the British, put the two destroyers back to the Sea Zone off of London where they were, and then the fighter went back to London, and then I also had a fighter down here in Sea Zone 48 that was on combat air patrol, or maritime air patrol, and I sent that back to London as well. So basically, I did a couple of things wrong. The first one was the range of the planes. So I was using the range that the plane actually has. So in the case of fighters, that's a 4, plus they were coming from an air base, so that would have given them the 1 additional movement, so that's 5. So I was using, to conduct a maritime air patrol, at least in terms of range, I was using the range of the plane itself, and that's incorrect. So planes on maritime air patrol have a range of 1, but if that country has the technological breakthrough of long-range aircraft, then that adds 1, and I believe that adds 1 to the Maritime Air Patrol as well. So planes can have a maximum of a range of 2 for Maritime Air Patrol, and the British at the time didn't have the technology long-range aircraft, so its fighters based in London would only have a range of 1 on Maritime Air Patrol. And this sea zone here was 2 away, and this one down here was 3. So neither one of those planes can be on Maritime Air Patrol in those sea zones. So they could only go within 1 here of the British Isles. So I went ahead and took the planes off of Maritime Air Patrol because they weren't in range of those 2 sea zones. So in essence, if not just Germany, but any country is convoying more than 1 sea zone away from a country's land territory, then that country has to have long-range aircraft technology to be able to reach. Now, I was looking quickly over the board, and it looks like almost every convoy route is within 2 zones of a potential country's land mass. So for instance, if the Germans try to convoy anywhere here in the Atlantic from England down to Africa, pretty much any sea zone with a convoy route is within 2 spaces of British or American territory. So if the British or Americans did have long-range aircraft technology, they could then engage with Maritime Air Patrol. So like this sea zone that these subs are in, it's within 2 of London. So once the British get the long-range aircraft technology, they can go ahead and Maritime Air Patrol that sea zone. Same thing over here. They could come from Canada, reach out to here, down here. Well, they don't have Gibraltar now, which we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but they originally at the start of this turn had Gibraltar, so they could reach the sea zones down here as well. So I think for the most part, there isn't any convoy route that isn't within two spaces of territory, which makes sense because if the maximum an aircraft can ever have for maritime air patrol is two, a range of two, and you've got a convoy route that is more than two spaces away, then how are you ever going to be able to take out those subs on maritime air patrol? It would be impossible. So that was one aspect of the maritime air patrol rule I was incorrect on. And the other part of that was, again, the whole wording of things kind of had me confused, where it mentioned an aircraft on maritime air patrol matches up one-on-one with a destroyer to go after the sub. So I was interpreting that as meaning that they could only sink a sub if a destroyer was matched up with the aircraft, and again on a one-on-one basis, but that's incorrect. So basically, if we assumed that the British did have the technology to allow an aircraft to be on maritime air patrol here in Sea Zone 23, okay, and there was no destroyer present, as long as these subs were engaging in convoy raiding, that aircraft could go after a sub on its own. It doesn't have to have a destroyer with it to attack the submarine, as long as the sub is engaging in combat air patrol or engaging in convoy raiding. Okay. If the sub isn't engaging in convoy raiding, then even if it is in a sea zone with an aircraft on maritime air patrol, the aircraft can't attack the submarine. It's only if it's on convoy raiding. If, again, I'm interpreting the rules correctly, which it doesn't seem to be that I can ever seem to get this particular rule correct, but that's the way it seems to me. So if these subs are convoy raiding, then an aircraft on maritime air patrol can attack the sub. If it's not, if it's just in the sea zone, not convoy raiding, then the aircraft can't. So then where the destroyer, the one-on-one pairing with the destroyer comes in, is again, let's say these subs are in the sea zone without convoy raiding, so the aircraft by itself can't attack the sub, but pairing with the destroyer, they can hunt the subs. I believe that is how the rule goes. And that's kind of the distinction between an aircraft being able to attack on its own a submarine and then needing the destroyer with it. So, because if you look at the rules under 8.9 submarines, it says effectively means that to kill submarines, you have to either wait for them to attack, kill them during convoy raiding, or hunt them using your aircraft on maritime air patrol paired with a destroyer. So those three ways. So if the sub obviously shows itself and attacks, then, you know, it's game on with your naval units being able to go after that sub because it's revealed itself. So that's the wait for them to attack part. The kill them during convoy raiding, I believe, is where the aircraft by itself that's on maritime air patrol can go ahead and target the submarines that are convoy raiding. And the third part is hunt them with using your aircraft and paired with a destroyer. That's the part where subs are in the same sea zone as an aircraft on maritime air patrol. They're not convoy raiding, but as long as you have a destroyer paired up with that aircraft, then they can still hunt the submarines. So I think I finally have the whole maritime air patrol worked out, at least hopefully. So now back to the action. The Germans went ahead and finished off Greece. So that was the last Greek territory that was unoccupied by the Germans. They went into Romania. So they activated that. So that was $3 plus the $3 bonus. But it does give the Russians a boost by having Germany adjacent to a Russian original territory. As far as purchases for Germany, because the U.S. is now in the conflict and the British started building up some transports, the Germans dropped 8 men in Western Germany So they're starting to build up defenses in Western Europe against a possible Allied invasion. They also dropped an infantry in Paris. They put 3 medium armor in East Germany, and they built 2 Stukas. So, and everything else just continues to migrate towards the border with the Soviet Union. So it looks like probably this turn 12 here, the Germans will go ahead and invade the Soviet Union. The Russians responded by building 5 mechanized they put in Urel Kursk, and 5 more medium armor that are up in Leningrad. So the Russians again have 2 concentrations of mechanized forces, one in the north in Leningrad and one in central Russia in Urel Kursk, to fight back against the German invasion. The Germans also, the 4 subs they had built last turn came out here into the Atlantic, so they will probably join this submarine fleet and start doing some convoy raiding. So that was pretty much it for Germany and Russia. As far as the United States goes, they had a lot of money to spend, and they split it pretty evenly in the Pacific and in Europe. So here on the European side of the map, they put down 3 heavy cruisers and a light cruiser. So this fleet didn't take off yet just because there's these 7 German subs lurking in the Atlantic. So I didn't think the U.S. fleet was strong enough at that point. So now with these additional cruisers on turn number 12 here, probably see this U.S. fleet set sail. Patton is already ready to lead the charge into Europe or possibly into the Mediterranean. The British had a few things going on. They built an infantry. They put into Cairo, and they also put a fighter in London. And then the big news was that Italy entered the conflict. So Mussolini has given the go-ahead for the Italians to launch an attack on the British Empire in the Mediterranean. And the Italians went ahead. They took Gibraltar. They lost a couple infantry. And actually, the British coastal artillery took out 2 ships, a torpedo boat destroyer and a destroyer. But the Italians took Gibraltar, not worth any money, but it is part of a condition to align nationalist Spain, and it also is a couple dollar bonus per turn for Italy. They also came in and took the territory bordering eastern Egypt, and they lost 1 infantry in return. So now they're at the doorstep to Cairo with about 8 infantry and a motorized. And they also came down here. They came out of Abyssinia and took Nubia with 2 infantry and a cavalry. And then their entire air force that engaged in the battle for Gibraltar and over here in North Africa flew back to Rome. So that's 5 fighters and 1 tactical in Rome. The Italians had saved their money, the $10 last turn, and then they got the technological breakthrough of wartime economy, and they got a good roll. I think they got a 9 on the 2 die, so they collected 25. So they'll have $35 to spend next turn. So pretty good amount of money for the Italians to spend. They also went ahead and took these 4 subs in their convoy raiding in the Mediterranean and took the maximum $6 off of the British. The rest of their fleet had come over to back up the landing in Gibraltar, so it's a battleship. I think 1 light and 1 heavy cruiser and 2 destroyers. And then this sub over here had come out because the 2 FEC transports left C-Zone 80 and were trying to make their way back to England. They didn't want to move too far and get in range of these German subs, but then this Italian sub came out and just killed both of them off. So that was pretty much the action in Europe. And the reason why Italy went ahead and entered the conflict and felt secure enough to, and as you can see, the Mediterranean is completely devoid of Allied ships. And the reason is because of the moves the Japanese made and forcing the British to react. So with the Japanese, they went ahead and took a couple more islands, New Britain and New Guinea. They also came up and took Wake. And they finished off the last two FEC territories in India that were worth any money. So I think the Japanese went up maybe another $3. They also finished off the technology for wartime economy. So I think the Japanese, they're up to $45 of income plus bonuses in the wartime economy role. They were up to, I think, 59 or 64, somewhere around there, worth of money. So they have quite a bit to spend. And what Japan went ahead and did is a bunch of the naval units that were down here in Southeast Asia, a bunch of infantry that was in British Malaya, a couple of cavalry in Calcutta, and infantry down here in Java, along with a bunch of warships, came over here to Sea Zone 85. So in Sea Zone 85, the Japanese have 4 transports with 6 infantry, 2 cavalry, 5 light cruisers, 2 destroyers, 2 heavy cruisers, a battle cruiser, 2 battleships, a light carrier with a fighter, and 2 fleet carriers with 3 fighters and a tactical bomber. So they came over, and their plan was either to go for Cairo on the following turn, or they can come down here into South Africa, go right for the Union of South Africa, and start taking some of these British territories down in southern Africa. So because of this Japanese move, the British had to react. So they were left with, 2 choices. Either they could keep this fleet in the Mediterranean, which would have probably dissuaded the Italians from entering the conflict this turn, because this British fleet, especially with the Free French forces as well, was way more than enough to take out the Italians if they would have joined the conflict. But then the problem would have been they would have left Cairo, the back door to Cairo, so to speak, completely open to this Japanese fleet with all these ground units. So the British had no choice. They had to leave the Mediterranean with their entire fleet to block off the Japanese from landing in Cairo. And as far as the fleets are concerned, the British have, of their own ships, 2 battleships, a battle cruiser, 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 3 torpedo boat destroyers, a light carrier with a fighter, a sub, and then they're backed up by a Free French battleship, heavy cruiser, and a sub. So I think the Japanese, especially because of the extra planes, have an advantage. So I can see the Japanese going into and engaging in a major naval battle with this combined Allied fleet, try to take them out completely. And then besides that, they could send their transports down 1, 2, and land in South Africa Union. And there's no way that the British are going to survive that. Even if the Japanese just bring ground units and send all their Air Force and naval units against this British fleet off of Cairo, the British are defending South Africa with 1 infantry. And again, the Japanese have 6 infantry and 2 cavalry. So the Japanese have a couple of options. If they take South Africa, that's not only worth $2, but they get the 2 minor complexes, and they can start building right in Africa themselves. And if they do go ahead and take out this combined British and French fleet, then, there's just nothing at all, really, from Africa all the way to the Indian Ocean of any Allied ships at all. So Japan definitely applying a lot of pressure on the British, forcing them to come out and try to defend against this fleet. And that, in turn, a domino effect, allowed Italy to enter the conflict without really having to worry about any repercussions from the British, because now they're now solely occupied with this Japanese fleet. And that all, again, it's all kind of like a snowball effect from the Japanese taking out the Far East Command. So once Japan did that, that now opened the door from India over to Africa for the Japanese to go that way if they wanted, because now all this is protected. So between the combination of completely taking out the FEC and getting the Australians so they're turtled up in Sydney, Japan has no danger of losing all of these money islands and India at this point. They don't even have to defend any of these islands. They can leave them devoid of any units, just because neither the Far East Command, who are basically at this point completely defeated, although they haven't surrendered because London has not surrendered, but they have no military units left on the board. They have no territories worth any IPP. And then the Australians are stuck on Australia itself with no chance to get off. So unlike the first game where both the FEC and ANZAC, once Japan's attention was turned towards the United States, those two countries started to come out and pick off these money islands one by one. And that at this point can't happen in this game. So Japan feeling pretty secure in Southeast Asia and South Pacific. That is why they've gone ahead and ventured over here into the Indian Ocean to go into Africa. Now, that does leave them a little bit vulnerable to the United States in the Central Pacific. And as we can see, the United States has come over. They're within a sea zone of Japan itself, and they've got a massive fleet here in these two sea zones. They've got 6 battleships, 4 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, 3 subs, 2 fleet carriers, 2 light carriers, and then 2 more destroyers down here. So that is more than enough to take on what the Japanese have left. In the Japanese home waters, we've just got 3 light carriers, a fleet carrier, 3 transports, and 2 heavy cruisers. So that was kind of the sacrifice Japan had to make to go ahead and launch this fleet over here down into the Indian Ocean. But the good news for Japan is, first of all, they can go ahead and send some naval units maybe over here to block this side of Japan, this sea zone over here, so that this fleet can't engage the remaining Japanese naval units that stay here in sea zone 38. Okay, so it would mean sacrificing probably a couple of heavy cruisers, which isn't the greatest option, but at least it keeps the U.S. away from them for another turn. And Japan is collecting a lot of money. They're going to be able to finish off the construction of 2 battleships this next turn. Plus, with about $60 or so to spend, they can buy a bunch of destroyers or subs or whatever. So they can build up a fleet in one turn pretty well. Still not enough to challenge the U.S. directly, but enough to give the U.S. maybe pause to go into Japan. And the other good news is the U.S. has no transports in this fleet. So it would just be a naval battle. So Japan itself, again, still isn't in any danger of being invaded. The U.S. could come down, send part of this fleet into the South Pacific, and maybe start engaging in some of these. Like there's a lone Japanese transport down here that took these 2 guys over. They could take that out. And then there's a couple of subs and a torpedo boat destroyer down off of the Australian coast convoying ANZAC down there. But Japan probably for the next couple of turns is going to pretty much exclusively build up the Navy around Japan itself to go head-to-head with this U.S. fleet. Now, the U.S. did drop 3 more destroyers down off of San Francisco, and they built a man and 2 medium armor that they can move on these 2 transports. But that's only altogether 2 medium armor and 2 infantry that can move over, so not really a lot the U.S. can do with that. They'll probably have to go ahead and build some more transports and ground units if they want to seriously consider invading Japan itself. As far as the Chinese Civil War, it's all but finished. The CCP took a last territory up north that was KMT owned, and now the KMT again is just down into this one mountain territory, about 8 infantry. Chiang Kai-shek is directing the defense himself in the mountains, but the CCP has completely surrounded it. They're not getting any income now. The KMT isn't. I can see the CCP going in on this turn to try to finish them off. They did buy 2 artillery this last turn to go ahead and increase their offensive punch a little bit. And that's pretty much it. So I think through 11 turns, the Axis are looking pretty good. both Germany and Japan are collecting quite a bit of money, especially with the bonuses. Italy's only collecting $12, but they have I think $4 worth of bonuses plus the wartime economy rolls. And again, if Japan can go ahead and take out this Allied fleet off of Cairo, I mean, there's just nothing to stop Italy from getting very aggressive. Italy's right at the doorstep to Cairo. They can go after Cairo themselves this next turn, especially their Air Force can reach in northern Rome, those 5 fighters and the 1 tactical. So the Japanese and Italians are definitely cooperating here. Again, I could see Japan's fleet trying to take out the British and French fleet here, while at the same time their ground units land in South Africa. And then on Italy's portion of the turn, they take all of these ground units that are next to Cairo along with their Air Force and try to take out the British in Cairo. If all of that happened, and I think in each one of those battles the Axis would be favored if that happened, the British are going to be in serious trouble. Now, obviously, the U.S. is going to be coming over with this fleet, but if Africa is all but lost, I mean, the British are pretty much holed up in London, and what can the U.S. really do against the combination of Germany, Japan, and Italy at that point? I mean, also part of it will depend on how things go in Russia, assuming Germany does launch Barbarossa this turn. So I think things are still in the balance, although for the second game in a row, things are tilting more towards the Axis. So we'll see what turn 12 brings.